At one point, Harry Potter fans were rejoicing because we'd been promised 5 spin-off movies. And the spin-offs would explore magic in other countries like the US, and at a time we'd never seen before in the early 1900s. The spin-off, of course, was the Fantastic Beasts franchise. It was a whole magical, marvellous world that we couldn't wait to explore. But with each movie progressively having worse showings both from the box office and the critics, the film series is basically cancelled now after only 3 installments, with the final 2 being put on indefinite hiatus. So how is it that the spin-offs from the most successful film franchise of all time could have been such a catastrophic failure? Well, to find that out, we need to dig deep into the story, and when we dig deep, we find franchise mismanagement, we find fans being taken for granted, the destruction of reputations, and what may be the first domino in the fall of the wizarding world as a whole. This is Fantastic Beasts, and why they failed. So in 2011, the final Harry Potter film was released by Warner Brothers. Fans queued in their thousands for the midnight release of the movie, which earned a record-setting $483 million in its opening weekend. In the end, the final installment of the Harry Potter franchise made $1.3 billion from its $250 million budget. And despite a few gripes with deviation from the books, fans were mostly really pleased with how the series ended. It was a resounding success, which was representative of the success of the franchise as a whole. And less than 5 years later, the first Fantastic Beasts movie would come out. A fun story following quirky Hufflepuff Newt Scamander as he travels to wizarding communities we never met in the Harry Potter series, as well as rounding up an assortment of fun magical creatures. Across the board, fans tend to herald that first one as the best of the 3 in the Fantastic Beasts series, and I wholeheartedly agree. But even in that first film, we saw hints of the things that would cause the whole franchise to eventually collapse. Following Newt in that first film as he rounded up his escaped magical creatures was a fun plot to inject him into the larger Grindelwald narrative. But that was exactly the issue. The story seemed to be happening around Newt rather than to him. And so the franchise as it developed became more of a Dumbledore-Grindelwald prequel series rather than a Newt Scamander series. But we as the viewers were never given the foundations of that story to sink our teeth into. Our foundations were rooted in rooting for Newt, and his warmth and his awkwardness, and his Hufflepuff love for these magical creatures and muggles alike. And so taking that, getting us to care about Newt, and then redirecting the franchise to being about Dumbledore and Grindelwald, it felt almost disingenuous, and I feel like it really impacted how emotionally involved we as viewers were in the journeys of the characters that the plot was actually about. It would be like watching Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and then going to the Chamber of Secrets and actually it's Justin Finch-Fletchley who hears the basilisk in the walls, and Harry is just following him around trying to help in some capacity. But the story is still told from Harry's perspective. The narrative being told became quite disconnected from the perspective we were experiencing it through, because we were seeing it through Newt's adventure, but it wasn't necessarily his story, and so things started to feel convoluted. And by the end of The Secrets of Dumbledore, Newt almost feels like a spare part. Like, sure, he's essential to the plot, but he's interchangeable. Dumbledore is central to the plots that are unfolding, and it all centers around him and Grindelwald. Newt could be swapped out with any other character, really. It doesn't have to be Newt. And further problems with that is that Grindelwald was barely really in the first movie. I mean, he was, but he wasn't really Grindelwald in that. And Dumbledore wasn't in it at all. So why should we care about them or their story when we've put our time and investment into Newt's story? Like, that's the story we thought we were getting. And so it kind of felt like a bait and switch, and it sort of broke the trust that should be implicit within viewer and storyteller. It would be like me telling you this video was about Fantastic Beasts and then making a video about snails. Snails could be Fantastic Beasts. That was a bad example. About water bottles then. It violates that trust, and then why would you be invested in the story unfolding at that point? And don't get me wrong, there are examples of stories where the protagonist isn't the central person in the plot. The plot sort of happens around them, but that's incorporated into the style of those stories. Because of that dynamic, we're given plot twists and an unreliable narrator dynamic that use it to their storytelling advantage, which isn't really the case with Fantastic Beasts. That's never what we were getting. It just sort of felt like those films had an identity crisis. So speaking of having an identity crisis, the Fantastic Beasts films don't seem to know what they want to be. A story in the wizarding world that no longer hinges on a teenager in a school. It has the potential to reinvent itself thematically, and I feel like Fantastic Beasts kind of got lost in that. On the one hand, their use of a quirky, warm, loving Hufflepuff magic zoologist who's chasing these cute little magical creatures who loves everyone he comes into contact with, that sort of keeps the sense of magical wonderment that we know in the Harry Potter series. But then they seem to realise halfway through that a story that's not shackled to a teenager in a school sort of gives them the freedom to explore darker and more mature themes and storylines. And so with the Grindelwald stuff, they seem to be trying to do that too. Except by trying to do both, they do neither very well. Like, Jacob and Newt's dynamic through the series is fun and quirky, but then the background to that being abandoned and tortured magical children and Grindelwald's relationship with the World Wars doesn't marry up very nicely. Like, juxtaposition can be good when it's handled well, when there are parallels running in common with the two threads, and they're tied together thematically, but Fantastic Beasts doesn't seem to have that. You get lost in the plots and almost get whiplash trying to keep up when you're thrown from one dynamic to the other, and all of that stems from the writing problem. To find the problem with the writing in Fantastic Beasts, we need to dive into what makes the writing in the Harry Potter series so good. And when you really dive into the Harry Potter series, you start to realise that at least the earlier books, they're not the war saga that the later books go on to be. They're not even fantasy books, not really. They're mystery novels. Sure, they have a fantasy background set in a magical world, but they are mystery novels. The Philosopher's Stone has all of the tropes of a typical mystery story. Harry is thrusted into this world from the very beginning, and then there's this mysterious item that Hagrid takes from Gringotts. And with the help of Ron and Hermione, he finds out what it is, finds out who Nicholas Flamel is, and then the Philosopher's Stone, and then what it does. And then there's the mystery of who's trying to steal it, and it's Snape, but why? For Voldemort. How do we get past Fluffy to stop him? And then the big twist at the end, as there always are in these mystery novels, is the big reveal, oh, it's not Snape, it's Quirrell. But actually it's not even Quirrell, it's Voldemort. And the Chamber of Secrets is the same, it's a typical whodunit. Voices in the walls, what are they? Why is Harry the only one who can hear them? What's the Chamber of Secrets and who opened it? Oh, it's been opened before, what happened? Was it Hagrid? Was it Malfoy? No, it wasn't either of them. Oh my god, big twist! It was Ginny, but you get to the chamber and it wasn't Ginny, it was Voldemort. And Prisoner of Azkaban is the same, and so is Goblet of Fire. Who put Harry's name in? Was it Ludo Bagman? Was it Igor Karkaroff? Was it Snape? Oh my god, Snape was a Death Eater. You're drip-fed more and more information, more and more clues, until the big whodunit twist. It was Mad Eye, except that it was actually Barty Crouch Jr. If you read any murder mystery or typical mystery novel, you will notice the same tropes. A big ensemble cast of characters, any of whom could be a potential suspect, many of them having their own motivations, clues being drip-fed slowly, plenty of red herrings, big climax and reveal, and then when you think it's all been revealed, there's always then one final twist on that reveal. The point is, the Harry Potter books in the beginning were these simple, formulaic mystery novels just set with the backdrop that we love of the wizarding world, and then J.K. Rowling could build more on top of those things she established, allowing her to then go deeper into that world that she'd built, and give us the war saga that is the Order of the Phoenix, the Half-Blood Prince, and the Deathly Hallows. But with Fantastic Beasts, she sort of threw out the formula of starting simple, the formula that allowed us to build our relationship with these characters before everything gets convoluted and twisted. And I think that's because J.K. Rowling evidently is not a movie script writer, she's a novel writer. And she's at her best when she can explore internal monologues, and world build on top of tropes that have already been proven. And the freedom she had with the Fantastic Beasts movies shows that when she digresses from that, it's a bit all over the place. And Crimes of Grindelwald is a prime example of this. I've seen that film 2.5 times. I couldn't get through it the third time. But I couldn't tell you the first thing about it. The Fantastic Beasts movies ended up being too hard to follow because they didn't stick to the simple formula of the plots. And so these Fantastic Beasts movies ended up being hard to follow, not very satisfying, and honestly just bad. And J.K. Rowling's writing isn't the only thing that let down this franchise. The controversy surrounding people involved within the Fantastic Beasts franchise is wild. Like, it feels like the franchise is cursed. Firstly, and most notably, J.K. Rowling. Her comments about the trans community, they understandably alienated a lot of the fan base. And there's no hiding away from the fact that that impacted the performance of the Fantastic Beasts films. So much so that in some of the trailers for the third one, they sort of hid away J.K. Rowling's credits and made them really small, whereas in the previous ones they had been much bigger, much more prominent. And it sort of felt like a conscious effort from the studio to win back some fans by pushing her away from the franchise. And then J.K. Rowling began to sort of double down and make the same comments over and over again and decide that was the hill she was going to die on. And so the franchise just couldn't distance themselves from her because she kept reminding everyone of what she was saying and why she was saying it. But J.K. Rowling isn't the only person who had some controversy from the Fantastic Beasts franchise. Johnny Depp, who played Grindelwald in the second movie, because there was sort of a James Bond thing where they cast somebody new in every film for that role. But Johnny Depp was embroiled in a public court case with his ex-wife Amber Heard, with accusations of abuse and manipulation and other behaviours. And so Warner Brothers, the studio behind the Fantastic Beasts films, pulled him from his role and recast Grindelwald with Mads Mikkelsen, who honestly I would have loved to see as Grindelwald to begin with because Mads Mikkelsen is phenomenal. However, Warner Brothers were also the studio behind the Aquaman franchise, in which Amber Heard had a role, and they didn't recast her, which caused outcry from fans because the most public of the court cases between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, Johnny Depp came out on top. So again, fans became tribal. Why are you recasting him and not her? They called for boycotts of the series again. And while all of that was going on, another star of Fantastic Beasts, Ezra Miller, also had allegations brought against him, including assault, burglary, grooming of minors, kidnapping, and harassment. The franchise appeared to be doomed to fail. And so after the third of the 5 installments, the project has been shelved with no plans to make the 4th or the 5th. The Wizarding World instead intends to return to Hogwarts, this time in the form of a TV series. And if you watch this video next, you will see my thoughts on why I think that's a terrible idea, and why I think it's doomed to fail.